landscape, and it goes beyond this. What we are doing to the polar ice caps is now visible from outer space. If there's an extraterrestrial civilization looking at the Earth through telescopes, they're wondering what's going on with the polar ice caps that have been so stable for thousands of years. And in a few decades, we're actually going to change the coastlines of the world's globe. Imagine having a globe that you've got for your children, that when they give it to their children, it's out of date because Florida looks completely different than it did when the globe was made. Now, in the construction industry, you could actually think of renewable, non-renewable materials like sand, lime, and clay, the materials we use to build the buildings. And all of these literal building blocks of construction are non-renewable resources that we're using with increasing rapidity. Even if it's hard to imagine that we could ever exhaust them. But the reality is that Saudi Arabia and much of the Middle East have now banned the export of sand. Can you imagine? Simply because they want to make sure they have enough for all the construction that's going on massively in the building of large cities in these areas. In India, the price of sand is soaring to the extent that it's actually inhibiting some of the construction in the megacities of Mumbai and elsewhere. It's just simply hard to get all the sand you need into the right places. Now, getting more attention than sand, obviously, is our impact on the world's carbon cycle and the sustainability of the atmosphere's regulation of climate. And despite all of our global efforts to rein in the greenhouse gas emissions that we're now in the process of putting in the atmosphere, you can't see the results in this curve. You can't see the Kyoto Protocol in this curve. You can't see the Copenhagen conference that we had in 2009. It's a little depressing. Then there's the water cycle, with a fifth of the world's people today facing physical water scarcity. This number is climbing fast as more and more nations increase their population, cross thresholds of physical water stress or water scarcity, and dramatically increase the number of people living in this category. Today, 15% of food production is based on the unsustainable use of water, chiefly bringing water out of aquifers that then are dropping to the point that eventually it won't be economical, at least, to bring that water up to the surface. And when that water's gone, the food is gone. Or consider that humanity is now the overwhelming force in the world's nitrogen cycle. Or that we are now the decisive factor in species extinctions. A few years ago, there was a report published in Nature by the Stockholm Resilience Center at the University of Stockholm with some 20 authors saying that of 9 key planetary boundaries, we've now grossly exceeded 3. Basically, carbon, climate emissions, the nitrogen cycle, and biodiversity. This is the first time in the Earth's history that one species has been the decisive factor in species extinction. And we are that species. That's why geologists say we're now entering the Anthropocene, the ecological, geological, biological era that is in fact driven by human beings. When I look at this photo of Mexico City, or a photo of any of the world's 28 megacities, those with 10 million inhabitants or more, I can't help but ask, if every one of these buildings were a sustainable building, would we have a sustainable city and a sustainable landscape? And I have to ask, and I'm a little dubious, can you have sustainable buildings in a fundamentally sustainable society with unsustainable population growth, unsustainable consumption, unsustainable sprawl? The current projections for world population is that we'll move from about 7.3 billion people we have now to 9, 10, or possibly 11. Probability is now around 11 by the end of the century. Most of this growth, almost all of it, will take place in cities. We now have 28 megacities. We're expected to have, or projected to have, 41 by 2030. Who knows how many we'll have by the end of the century. This is a massive amount of construction. It's important to integrate social, moral, and ethical considerations in looking at these questions. If you look closely at this landscape, you'll see that these buildings are primarily residences for people who are not particularly wealthy. And so an important priority for the world's governments has to be, and I think is, how to assure at least some level of prosperity and equality or equal opportunity for all people, or at least come as closely as possible to eliminating extreme poverty. Which we're doing a good job of doing, in the sense that we're building the middle class. It's been one of the most successful Millennium Development Goals. I'm afraid I'm about to get some bad news.
Please, no bad news. Just so people don't start to leave, we started a bit late, so relax. Everything's just going to run a little bit later today, so Bob, take your time and finish off. But please don't feel like you're going to miss your next session.
Okay, I will try not to delay you too long from what I'm sure are great assessments, refreshments out there. But I do think I will try to summarize some of this to make it a little easier for you. We have a global middle class emerging and is growing much faster than the world population as a whole. It is a success story. It was worth noting that 1.2 billion people still do live on about $1 a day. Those of us with more than enough can hardly resent or be sorry about the fact that we're extending the middle class to others. We can't look down on that. That's a success story. And many commentators look at this and they say, well, so what's the big deal